So when it comes to thinking about orientations toward politics, broadly understood, we could start by dividing conceptually between people who want to contemplate or think about politics and people who want to engage in politics or enact something in the political realm. So if we had that, you could imagine kind of a split between orientations of politics. You have your contemplators over here and your enactors or doers over here. It's a very famous distinction within social theory, a distinction that goes back to a German social theorist by the name of Max Weber, early part of the 20th century. And Weber's distinction was between these two vocations that he called the vocation for politics and the vocation for science. Don't let the word science scare you. When Weber used the word science, he meant something much broader than what we mean in English. He meant something like systematic study. So you have your people who want to systematically study politics, and then you have your people who want to go and do things in politics. The reason why this is kind of useful as a first cut is because if you think about the world of thinking about politics, you have thinkers and doers, right, in sort of broad brushstrokes. But I think that's an inadequate distinction because within each of those camps, in a way, what you get is you get a repetition of the same kind of distinction. So within the camp of contemplators, you get your sort of pure contemplators, who are your scholars, right? People who are really interested in producing systematic knowledge about politics and are not really interested in enacting or doing much outside of the realm of the academy. And then you have your people who are interested in producing systematic knowledge about politics, primarily so they can then give advice back to the policy sphere, so people who become experts, if you will. That distinction, the sort of scholar-expert distinction, happens within the contemplator pole. Now on the other side, within the enactor or the doer pole, you have your practitioners, right, pure-form doers who just want to go out and enact and do things in politics. And you have folks that do things and then want to step back and reflect on that a little bit. You might call them reflective practitioners or scholar activists, people who have a grounding in political action, but who then want to bring some systematic reflection to that. So you don't get just a distinction between scholars and doers. What you get is kind of a four-part distinction between scholars, experts, scholar activists, and practitioners. Now, what's interesting about that four-part, right, is there are certain kinds of what you might call systematic alliances between some of these positions. Some of the conversations across these different modes or different nodes are a lot easier than others. So for instance, there's a conversation, a rather easy conversation that could be had between the practitioners on the one hand and experts on the other, because they're the local doers of their particular camp. So practitioners come in and they look to scholars and they want people to give them information about how to be better practitioners. So you have a kind of easy alliance between those two intellectual positions. By the same token, you have an alliance or an easy connection, if you will, between your scholars and your scholar activists or reflective practitioners. They're the local contemplators of their group. They're the local theorists, the local reflectivists, if you will, of their particular group. The really hard conversation is between the two extremes, between the practitioners over here and the scholars over here, because there's sort of two jumps away on that scale. A lot of folks, most folks I would say, who are engaged in professional master's degrees in international relations either come out of the practitioner world or are interested in joining the practitioner world. Most of the folks in the academy with permanent jobs in the academy, especially tenured jobs in the academy, are on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. They're scholars first and foremost, interested in producing articles and books that are going to pass the scrutiny of peer review and contribute to systematic knowledge of politics. This means that in order to have a conversation, a productive exchange between those two, one of two things has to happen. Either the scholars have to adopt more of that expertise role so that you end up with a connection between practitioners and experts, or the practitioners have to become more reflective, start incorporating theory into their work, not so much as the way a scholar would use it for systematic contribution to knowledge, but as a way of helping to provoke and promote reflection on their own practice. So in a way, the practitioner then kind of moves to that reflective practitioner node, which allows that connection and that alliance, if you will, over with the scholar. scholars. So you, as a student, have choices about how you're going to approach this. Your faculty also has choices about how they're going to approach this. The kinds of characteristic tensions and connections that you will find throughout the course of the program and throughout reflections on the state of international theory have a lot to do, I think, with this kind of underlying structural pattern that you can see across and informing these various different debates.